And Pete, for Newcastle, there are reports that they will have to sell a star in January just in order to stay under the PSR limit and avoid any potential points deduction or all the things that come with that. Who would be at the top of that list to go in January without hampering the squad too much?
Yeah, obviously it's a difficult situation for Newcastle. We've talked many times about their whole financial situation. Despite having the money to spend, their hands are tied because of PSR and FFP.
Just
The
crazy.
real,
I mean, I know we're going to go into that and they say the players, but it baffles. The mind boggles. I mean, all these years that Chelsea, Arsenal, Manchester United, Manchester City, etc., they've been able to spend whatever they've wanted. And the gap now, you've got two owners, the Newcastle owner, of Marinakis at Nottingham Forest, two owners that have got the wealth, they've got the finance to spend, they want to invest into football, the money's going back into football, they're sustainable, they can keep their club more than afloat. How are they going to close the gap? It's just, I know we talk about it all the time, but Newcastle, the richest club in the world, and we're doing a pod now saying about what the players they're going to sell. It's the mind boggles. How are they going to be allowed to close that gap in the short space of time? They're not going to be able to do it.
yeah, it's harder and harder. They had to do it in the summer as well, Paul, in the window when they had to sell Elliot Anderson and Yakuba Minta to Brighton and to Nottingham Forest. That was just to balance the books and make sure that they didn't face any PSR charges. So you got to feel for Eddie Howe really, because thinking that he would have so much money to spend, he's not able to spend it, and they might have to sacrifice more players in the January window. It's a tough one.
About Newcastle looking at world stars, shouldn't we? Not selling
Yep.
the best players in the Premier League.
Yeah, it's a tough one. It's like wheeling and dealing it is for Eddie Howe and the Newcastle recruitment team. I'm sure Eddie Howe doesn't want to lose anybody in his squad because the squad is quite thin, especially with the injury problems they've had. But if you're looking at it from a business side of things, probably Miguel Almiron would be one of the main ones that maybe they would be willing to let move on. He was strongly linked with the move in the summer, but he ended up staying at St James's Park. He's not really figured as much this season under Eddie Howe. I think if Newcastle could offload him, it'll bring some money in and maybe balance the books. And Kieran Trippier would be another interesting one as well. He's now 34 and he's not playing regularly in the side. It looks like Tino Livramento is the number one first choice right back for Eddie Howe as well. And with Trippier being one of the higher wage earners at the club as well, and not playing as much as he used to when he first arrived at the club, maybe Newcastle would be willing to let him move on as well. So if they could maybe move those two players on, that will maybe help the financial situation and allow Newcastle to enter the transfer market as well. There's been talk of Harvey Barnes even leaving, which would be a big shock to me. I think Harvey Barnes is a top player, although he's not played regularly, just because Anthony Gordon's ahead of him for that left winger role. I think Harvey Barnes is a top player. He's always contributed to Newcastle, can score goals, create goals. So if Newcastle have to sacrifice him in the January window just to allow them to keep their other star players and to sign some players, it's going to be a real tough one for Eddie Howe to stomach, really, if he had to lose Harvey Barnes.
And Paul, you mentioned Newcastle already having to sell Yakuba Minte. We talked so much about the right wing spot that they are in the market for. That was the player they had lined up to basically take that spot over time. How do Newcastle close the gap if they aren't able to spend it at the rate that they want to? Is it through the academy? Is it potentially selling Isak just because it's such a large sum that they'll be able to reinvest it into the squad and potentially find kind of cheaper alternatives who can score a similar amount of goals?
Cheaper alternatives that play the same way and score the same amount of goals? Nah. If you can find one of them, you'll be a sporting director at a top club very quickly. That type of player isn't out there. The problem for Newcastle is they've got the resources, they've got the finances to be able to do it today, tomorrow, next week, but they're not allowed to. They're bound by the rules. It's going to be work in progress. It's going to take them time. The FFP and PSR, in the similar way that other clubs find a way around it, they have to find a way around it. You mentioned there in your question about the academy. What's Newcastle's academy going to be used for? Potentially going forward, it's going to be used to balance the books. Because you get the homegrown players and you sell the homegrown players, which again is another a bugbear of mine with the FFP and PSR rules, because you see all these top young players being used and sold at a certain age without being given an opportunity at the club that they've come through the academy. You look at the clubs, they spend millions, hundreds of thousands, hundreds of millions at different clubs on the academy to bring these players through as investments for the future. A lot of lower league clubs, you look at Championship, League One, League Two clubs, they sell players on from the academy that will keep their club afloat, and the finances that it brings in is, it's vital to the club. But actually, you're now seeing Premier League clubs, the likes of Manchester City, the likes of Chelsea, bringing homegrown players through to do what? To sell and to balance the books. The perfect example is Cole Palmer.
And Pete, should Newcastle find a way to get under that PSR limit coming into this coming summer, do you think they'll spend big on a center back? It does feel like the Mark Gahey links have really died down. They've been okay at the back this year without him, but Antonio Silva, a very talented young center back, seemingly continues to be rumored to a move to St. James's Park.
Yeah, it's still an area of the team that Eddie Howe would like to strengthen in. Obviously, having Sven Botman coming back is a huge boost to Newcastle in the coming weeks as well. But Dan Burns been playing there all season, done a very good job. Fabian Schär as well. So if they get any more injuries in defence, they really are caught short in that line. As you said, Mark Gahey was a top target in the summer transfer window, but that move failed to happen. So they are probably looking at other centre-back options as well. Antonio Silva, very highly rated young player, played at the highest level for Benfica and also for Portugal as well. I think he's got 17 caps. He was part of the Euro squad as well. Interestingly enough, he's not been playing regularly for Benfica this season, with other players ahead of him in the pecking order for Bruno Laga's side. But again, I think he would still be an expensive buy if Newcastle were to sign him. You're probably looking between 40 to 50 million, I think, for somebody like Antonio Silva. But he would tick a lot of boxes for Newcastle, but I think there'll be a lot of interest in the centre-back if Benfica are willing to let him go. I don't think anything will happen in January because Benfica are trying to win the Portuguese title, still hoping to progress in the Champions League as well, so they won't want to lose players. And funnily enough, one of the players who's keeping him out of the Benfica team, Thomas Araujo, he's attracting a bit of interest in the Premier League as well. So if somebody was to come in for him, there's no way that Benfica will let both of their centre-backs leave in the January window and maybe not even in the summer window as well. So yeah, I'm sure Newcastle are doing their homework on a lot of centre-backs, but I think, as we've spoken there previously, I think the priority for January is if they can bring in a right-sided winger. If they can raise the funds to do that, I think that's the main area that Eddie Howe wants to strengthen in, especially now there's further injuries in attack with Callum Wilson facing another spell on the sidelines, and if Anthony Gordon or Alexander Isak were to pick up injuries, Newcastle will be in a lot of trouble in attack.
I was going to ask you a stupid question. I was going to say, what can Newcastle afford to spend? So I'll word it differently. What are Newcastle allowed to spend or in their remit? Do we have any idea of a ballpark figure of what they can spend in January? We know what they can spend. It's unlimited. But what are they actually restricted to spending? Do we know?
Yeah, I don't think it's an exact figure, but obviously they had the money to try and sign Mark Gahey, 70 odd million. That's, the Newcastle fans are going, well, where's that money gone? Can we spend that? And it's all gone very quiet on that front. And we're hearing more and more news coming out of the club that Newcastle have to sell before they can buy. That's why we've had reports of Harvey Barnes maybe leaving, Miguel Almiron, Kieran Trippier. So I don't think there's a massive amount for Newcastle to spend. Obviously, on the other side of that, they're trying to convince Alexander Isak to sign a new deal. And obviously, if they were to give him a new contract and get it agreed, that would affect FFP and PSR. And they give Anthony Gordon a huge deal after the summer window as well. And that's going to affect their PSR and FFP as well. So, yeah, I don't think Newcastle have loads to spend in January, in all honesty. That's why they're trying to generate funds by maybe offloading players that they can feel they can cope with that.